My name is Reina. My name is Reina. For those of you who I've never met before, actually based on the list, I think I do actually know all of you. And I just have a heartfelt welcome, and I also want to thank you guys for making time. On behalf of our board of directors, I see some of them with us today, June, Carol, and Pat. I just wanted to welcome and thank everybody for coming. We want to extend a special thanks to Mike Rosa from Taub Family Selections. He's going to actually be our tour guide today. And he's actually dialing at 9:00 p.m. his time. So he's actually already eaten and probably had some wine already while we're getting started. I also want to thank Mark Milton from Beverages, Marketing, and More. If any of you have attended our in-person gala when we're able to have it, the wine tasting station is a highlight of that event. And that's all thanks to Mark. And so since we can't have that now, Mark has been nice enough to extend some of his connections, like to Mike. Also, Fujioka's being our wine supplier for this fundraiser is thanks to Mark as well. So Mark can give a wave. We appreciate your support, Mark. And we also like to thank Fujioka's and Macaroni Grill for being our partners for our this first of events. And of course, we wouldn't have an event without all of you. So hopefully you guys enjoy yourself. I want to introduce and thank Michael McRae. He's our staff actually located in Kona. He's going to be our back Zoom tech support today. And then he's also going to be monitoring the chat. So if you're able to and would like to put anything in the chat in terms of questions or, answer anything, raise anything, he'll be monitoring that so he can work with Mike to get those answered as well. So with that, thank you for participating in our fundraiser. While this is a fun wine and education event, all of it is being done to provide some support for our education programs to support homeownership, foreclosure prevention, and rental counseling, as well as creating affordable ownership opportunities. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Rosa to introduce himself and get us started. Thank you so much again, everyone.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to be speaking to you from my phone, but then operating from my computer. That's just in the case that we have an internet failure and I can keep talking and working from the phone, even if there's something that happens. It always seems in this virtual world, there is something that might happen. So I see some people on the screen get with glasses of wine, friends together. And I think that's really what this is all about, the Hawaii Homeowners Center and creating a greater sense of community. And definitely when we get through these wineries today and we talk and travel through Italy, we'll get a sense of the community that these wineries offer to each of the individual areas they're from. And hopefully this activity helps bring communities together and helps us continue to develop our culture in a positive way, working with friends and neighbors and always enjoying each other's company. I work for a company called Taub Family Selections. Taub Family Selections is a fine wine-oriented company, kind of born from a larger company called Palm Bay International. And we cover wines from all over the world. So we have over 100 wineries that we represent. That's a lot. So my memory is pretty good, but 100 wineries times however many wines they produce, we represent on any given year with new vintages coming in somewhere in the range of 1,100 wines. So that's a lot to remember. But I'll take you through these fantastic wineries in Italy that really represent not only the benchmark of each wine region that they come from, but that have proven to be sought after wines in the world. So we're going to go on a tour through Italy. We'll start in Trento, Italy. We'll move down to the Veneto. So we'll start kind of up in the northeast. We'll move down into the Veneto, and then we'll head over to the islands, the two islands of Italy that are most well known. There's, of course, hundreds of tiny islands, but everyone knows the island of Sardinia and the island of Sicily. And then we'll get into a little bit of Tuscany. We'll head back towards the central part of Italy and end in Tuscany with a little dessert and chocolate cake and some Sangiovese. So it'll be educational as we go. I encourage everyone to put questions in the chat. I'll try and address them as they come up. And if I miss them, We have a great support group here with Mark Milton, that was already mentioned, who I work with in Hawaii. Michael and Rihanna will all be watching the chat to say, hey, Mike, don't forget to look in the chat, and I'll answer any questions I have. The first thing I want to address is something that I really like to talk about in warmer climates, is that we often think red wine should be consumed at room temperature, but this is not the case. Red wine is to be served at cellar temperature, right? We often think room temperature and cellar temperature are the same because cellars aren't heated and they aren't cooled. But room temperature, especially where I am in Southern California, often at my house is residing around 74 degrees. Cellar temperature oscillates between 58 and 62 degrees. So the first thing I want to do today is to help you enjoy red wine better in a warmer climate when you're in those hotter months in Hawaii and the room temperature is in the 70s. Go ahead and take your red wine 20 minutes before you serve it and put it in the refrigerator. And that will bring the temperature down closer to that cellar temperature, and you'll be able to enjoy a lot more of the aromatics of the wine as opposed to getting that throat burning alcohol that happens as wine heats up. So this is a big misnomer that in our industry, one that I try and kind of eradicate out as quickly as possible, but it's a definite process. Storage is an issue in restaurants and things like that. Of course, the finer restaurants always know how to treat wine. But if you have your red wine and you're planning on drinking it with us, do not be shy to put it in the refrigerator now. And when we get to the red wine, you can pull it out and it will be the proper temperature for you. So just wanted to point that out before we get started. All right. So let's dig in. Hopefully we all have our bruschetta. Bruschetta is how we say it in Italian, not bruschetta. Bruschetta, the SCH makes a sound. So bruschetta is our first course with the dinner. And with that, we're going to have none other than the great way to start and end every single meal. You can drink it in the middle if you want also, is by drinking sparkling wine. And this isn't just any sparkling wine. This is sparkling wine from the mountains of Trento, produced in the same way as champagne. So I'm going to show you just a little bit about the region here. You can see, and hopefully you can all see my little mouse cursor. We're up in the northeast section of Italy. And in fact, this area was not even part of Italy until 1931. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? So this area is a unique area within Italy that you find a lot more Germanic and Austrian architecture and much less of that Romanesque, Byzantine, and Renaissance architecture, all right? So it's a pretty interesting area as it is. What we're met with is an area that is in the mountains, the Dolomite Mountains or the Alps of Italy, and those mountain ranges run right through the center of this area and really in this portion here. Now, this little body of water that we see to the south end of the map is called the Lago di Garda, the Lago di Garda. And Lago di Garda just means the Lake of Garda, is the largest body of water, landlocked body of water in Italy. It runs all the way down south towards the Adriatic Sea. Now, this is important because what it does is every afternoon, the Mediterranean trade wind comes swooshing past the south tip of the boot of Italy and comes up the Adriatic Sea between Italy and Yugoslavia, Bosnia, and all throughout Macedonia and Albania, comes up right through there, and it hits the Veneto, and it starts running up Lago di Garda, and it comes up into Trento. Now, the south part of Italy is very warm, while the north part in the mountains is very cold. But that trade wind brings this breeze and brings with it a warm temperature current. right? And that allows for extra ripening to take place. Grapes take in sunlight and heat to create sugar, and they take coolness to create acidity. I'll get into that in just a moment. So at about 2 p.m. in these vineyards, you need your sweater because the mountains say, I've had enough. It's time to push back. And they start bringing their glacial breezes down from the mountains, and they push back against that Mediterranean trade wind, and it runs down the Adriatic Sea, bringing a nice cooling effect down the coast of the Adriatic coast of Italy. And that gives those grapes that acidity. So what is sugar, right? Sugar is, we understand when you press a grape, it creates something called must, and that must has sugar in it, as acidity, as phenolic structures and things like that. Yeast eats sugar and creates two byproducts, CO2 and alcohol, all right? So that's incredibly important. Now, acids can go through several different types of things within the fermentation cycle, the conversion of mallow acids into lactic acids. That's one of the conversions that happens. So when we talk about mallow acid, which is more of like a tart citrus bitterness, and a lactic acid, you can think of the acid that's inherent in milk. Milk actually has an acid component, a pH to it, all right? And that's why when we drink a buttery Chardonnay, it's gone through a mallow-lactic conversion. So the acid has actually converted into lactic acids. So this is all nice because it's chemically, and you guys are just starting to drink. I promise I will not be chemically discussing winemaking processes later in the presentation, but it is important that you understand why grapes are growing here. So we have the warmth effect coming from the Mediterranean trade winds. We have the cooling effect developing acidity, which is essential. When you take a sip of wine and your mouth waters in the back of your palate, that's the acid. This is one of the most important characteristics of Italian wine, because Italian wine is meant to be drunk and consumed with food, all right? And a lot of the food includes tomatoes. Well, tomatoes are an acidic fruit. They're actually a fruit. We all know that. I'm just reminding you, those of you that didn't know. And that acidity, right, is present in a tomato sauce and a lot of the food and the cuisine of Italy. And so you need high acid wine to balance the acid of the food, because when you start to salivate at the back of your mouth from the acid, it wipes your palate clean, so you receive the next bite completely anew. Incredibly beautiful thing about food and wine pairings together, all right? So Ferrari has found its spot in to produce wine. How did they find their spot, really? And it started with this guy. I'm going to skip some stuff. I'll do this a lot throughout the presentation. I'll move back and forth throughout slides. I just kind of keep the slides as talking points. I don't really stick to them that much, so you'll forgive me, but it will be, it'll all make sense in the end. This guy right here, Giulio Ferrari, he's the one who started the Ferrari winery, and he did so in 1902. He had learned to make wine in Champagne, France, and he studied it at a little place called Bollinger. So if you know Bollinger, for sure, one of the great champagne houses of the world, with an expertise in barrel fermentation. He learned to make wine in the champagne method there. We call it method champenois. We call it metodo classico. This is a secondary bottle fermentation, all right, and which I'll get into in just a moment. But what he had to do when going back to his homeland, back to Trento, Italy, he smuggled the first Chardonnay vines into Italy, right? This is a documented fact. Merlot had been there for almost 500 years, but Chardonnay had not. So he brought the first cuttings of Chardonnay, and he went and convinced his neighbors to plant Chardonnay. This area was driven by Germanic hereditary law, which was derived from Napoleonic hereditary law, where Napoleon needed men to fight in his army. So he created a law that no father could give his land to just one son. He had to split it equally between the male heirs so that brothers wouldn't kill brothers to gain the family fortune. All right. Thank God we're past those times now. Otherwise, I might be a goner. But with that means people, the average land holding in Trento, Italy was 1.5 acres. So very small for viticulture. So he had to go to people and convince people to plant Chardonnay in their vineyards so that he could produce the sparkling wine. And he was successful at that, at least in a very small quantity initially. And he started producing wine in the same method as champagne. So what is the difference between champagne method and Prosecco? And why don't we call Ferrari champagne? The reason we don't call Ferrari champagne is because it does not reside in Champagne, France. Due to EU laws, the only thing that can be called champagne is wine produced in the region of Champagne in France. Everything else is called sparkling wine. Champagne is made by making a still base wine and then adding a solution called liqueur d'expédition, which is yeast and sugar, and it causes a secondary fermentation to happen to that still wine. At this point, the still wine was produced, put into the bottle, and the liqueur d'expédition is added to each individual bottle, causing a second fermentation to take place in that bottle. All right. Over time, the widow Clicquot, Veuve Clicquot, if any of you know Veuve Clicquot, she invented the riddling table to remove the yeast sediment from the bottle because the bottles were really volatile in transportation while they had the yeast in there. And she was the first person to start exporting champagne. She did so to the Tsar of Russia. And now that process is called disgorgement. And so the removal of the yeast from the bottle is called disgorgement. And then we add what's called the dosage. We can kind of dictate sweetness at that point for the sparkling wine. Right? And that's how champagne is made. Here's how Prosecco is made. There's a big giant tank, right? They make the base still wine. They inoculate with yeast. They close the vessel, right? They close that vessel. And because they close the vessel and don't allow the CO2 to escape, remember I said yeast eats sugar, creates CO2 and alcohol. Because they don't allow that CO2 to escape, all the wine in that closed vessel is now carbonated, right? You can make any single wine on the planet carbonated by simply not allowing the CO2 to escape the fermentation vessel, right? So maybe you guys did or did not know that, all right? So the third method is terrible. It's called the insertion method. It's basically you make a still wine and you have a big CO2 canister and it's just like Coca-Cola. The syrup goes in, the carbonation goes in, and that's something like your cheapest of the cheap Andre sparkling wine, Andre Cold Duck and Corbel and things like that are made in that method, right? Ferrari is made Metodo Classico method Champenois, all right? And Ferrari really represents the first DOC in Italy of sparkling wine that's required to be produced in that Metodo Classico, or the same method as champagne. Unfortunately for Giulio Ferrari, he had no heirs. And so when he passed away, he left the winery to his friend and cellar master, Bruno Lunelli, who had a big family. And Bruno Lunelli left it to Marcello Lunelli, and Marcello Lunelli has left it in the hands of Matteo and Marcello and his niece Camilla and nephew Alessandro. So today we're in the third generation of ownership of the Ferrari winery, all family owned, and an incredible group of people. These are Marcello Lunelli is the viticulturalist, the master blender, the chef de cave, makes all the wine. Camilla is the head of marketing. Matteo is the general manager and head of sales. And then Alessandro's executive board member and works on some of the other properties that Ferrari owns in other areas of Italy. So I went over a little bit about the history already. Here's some of the vineyards and the mountains you can see around. I've stood in this vineyard, actually in this particular spot before. Here's some of those mountains you can see, truly a breathtaking. This is called the Valle de Rovere, and you can see these giant cliff facades. This is dolomite soil, and this is important because you see, I do believe this picture might have been enhanced in some way, but it proves the point well about how the light refracts off of these cliff facings and hits the grapes for extra hours of sunlight, for extra time of brightness. There we can see some of the fun taking place as dosage is happening here at the winery. So they pop the bottle of Ferrari.
Region.
It's not matching me, I'll tell you that.
You're not a red wine person.
And then, oh, I think we have, if someone could just mute themselves, somebody talking in the. And then this is the famous
Of course it
Giulio
does.
Ferrari, the first Ferrari vineyard planted and owned by Giulio Ferrari. So this is an incredible vineyard site on the top of a mountain. So let's open the Ferrari Brut. If you haven't already, let's start drinking the Ferrari Brut. This is 100% Chardonnay, right? 100%. We do make one that involves Pinot Noir. The three grapes used to make champagne-style sparkling wine are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier, right? And I told you guys a little bit about the aging method. So here's what they do: is they put the still wine in that bottle. They add that liqueur d'expédition to cause the secondary bottle fermentation, and it sits on that yeast lees for a period of time. In champagne, the law says you must sit on the yeast lees in the bottle for 15 months before you can remove the yeast. Ferrari does this for a longer period of time. Ferrari really does this at about 24 months, so a little bit longer period of aging on the yeast lees. And that is important because it allows for structure to really develop within the wine itself. It gives it that doughy and yeasty component. We should all be getting a lot of like bright green Granny Smith apple. We should get some nice floral notes, and of course a little bit of minerality floating around there. And we can really get the acidity, that mouth watering in the back. We have a nice tight perlage. So perlage is the little bubbles that come up from the bottom of the glass. And that really is a sign of a wine that goes through secondary bottle fermentations, is when the perlage, the little bubbles, are really fine and tight and continuous, right? Wines that are made in the Charmat method, like Prosecco, will tend to be varied in the bubble throughout the glass. I think one of the things you really do smell here and really can pick up from that extra yeast aging is like a sweet brioche dough on the nose. And it's the perfect way to start with some grilled rosemary bread, the Roma tomatoes, the garlic and the basil, and that bruschetta, because it will balance beautifully with the acidity of the tomato. The garlic won't overtake it because the wine has a great strength and textural component to it. So I hope everybody is enjoying the best way to start a meal, end a meal, and have in the middle of the meal some Ferrari Brut. Right. So that was mine, and we got to pour the Pinot Grigio next. So if you don't have it already, you can move on to the Pinot Grigio from Bertani. The Royal House of Bertani, everyone can see here, a beautiful cartouche on the bottle. Hopefully you have your bottle there. It's named Volante, and we'll go into Bertani. So from the Valley of the Cellars. So Bertani is located in the Valpolicella. And if anyone took Latin here would be a great trivia question. We were asking some trivia questions earlier while everyone was getting on the call. Those who know their Latin know what Valpolicella means already, because you have val, meaning valley, cella, meaning cellars, and poli, Valpolicella, poli meaning many, the valley of many cellars. And so that's because the wines in this area are incredibly long-lived and long-aged. The valley really runs from the area of Venice, and it really starts more around Verona, that you see a lot of this red wine production. But from Venice all the way over to the Lago di Garda, this is the south tip of that lake, Lago di Garda. So this region is immediately next to Trento, the other region we were in earlier. See how I planned that? That was a perfect segue. So a lot of red wine production goes on in this brown area, and a lot of white wine production goes on in this gray area. Why? Because we have a beautifully strewn about volcanic soils in this area, and this is incredibly important for white wine production. And as you come out towards the sea, that's where the volcanic eruption was the most prominent. Bertani has been around since 1855, and they are an incredible producer that was started by these two guys, Giovanni Battista and Gaetano Bertani. And the Bertani family was merchants, so they had, at this time, the Venetian Empire was very strong. Remember, Italy was only unified and made a country in 1858 by the first king of Italy, Vittorio Emanuele II. So as a country, Italy is younger than the United States. Of course, their history and lineage goes back much further than that. But the city-state of the Venetian Empire was one of the most powerful empires in the city-state days. And it was because of their sea travel and their ability to hit faraway lands through their maritime influence. And they were great traders. So the Bertani family founded the winery in their villa at a place called Villa Novare in the Valpolicella and started the winery in 1857. What was unique about the Bertani family was that they had studied in Burgundy, France. Now you see this thing, all these Italians studied in France. If you were of a certain class, you went to school in France. And while they were in Burgundy, France, they learned about a yeast strain that could live in a higher alcohol environment. In this area, all the wines were sweet because the natural yeast, the indigenous yeast that was found ambient in the air, would die at about 11% alcohol. And the wines had the ability to go much higher in alcohol. Think about our Napa cabs today that run 15.5% alcohol. So that would leave behind residual sugar in the wine. So this area's wines were always just a little off dry. The Bertani family brought back that yeast strain from Burgundy, and they started fermenting wines to complete dryness. And it became so beloved by the first king of Italy, Vittorio Emanuele II, that he allowed them and gave them the royal right to use the Savoy family crest, his family crest, on their bottles of wine, so long as they provided his palace with wine. So it was a good trade-off for Bertani back in those days. Today, it's owned by the Angelini family. The Bertani family had sold it some years ago as the family fractured and their interest in viticulture diminished. And today, the head winemaker of the Angelini family is the famed Andrea Lenardi. And he oversees several wineries for Bertani and is thought to be one of the most progressive viticulturalists in Italy today, and really on the cutting edge of vineyard health, vine health, and how you farm in the vineyard. And he's an incredibly important figure in Italy. He comes to America often to speak at vine health conferences and farming conferences, and is an incredible guy. So what we see here, these are the two original wines of Bertani we can see over here. The Soave was served at the coronation of George VI, the King's Speech King, if you guys remember that. And the Secco Bertani, the red wine, was the one beloved by the first king of Italy. In Valpolicella, they produce a wine style called Amarone. And I'll take a moment to speak about Amarone because you have to understand Amarone to understand Bertani. Amarone, they lay these grapes out on these mats, and these mats are called arli. They then come up into the attic, where you see here, they're in the attic, and they open and close windows to allow the grapes to slowly go through a dehydration process called appassamento. All right. Over that process, they lose about 40% of their yield, and then those grapes are pressed and macerated, and they go through a 50-day fermentation cycle, and then they go into barrels for a period of about 7 years, all to produce a wine called Amarone. Bertani is the creators of Amarone and the people that made the first dry style of Amarone, and that was only done in 1959. It was the first commercial release of an Amarone, right? But with Bertani's fame and producing great red wines, they needed to produce some white wine because you can't drink red wine all the time. I know there's some people out there saying, yes, I can drink red wine all the time. But what they do is they produce some white wines. So they go to the area of Soave, this gray area I'm talking about, where white wine production is really prominent and at its peak in this particular area. In Soave, we have that volcanic soil, and in that volcanic soil is a single vineyard named Volante, right? Volante is the name of a vineyard. The grape of Soave is Garganega. It's an indigenous grape that was brought by the Greeks about 3,000 years ago. But there's also a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc and a little bit of Pinot Grigio. And why Pinot Grigio? Pinot Grigio is actually a really important grape in Italy. It was something that really helped put Italy on the map as a style and a varietal that American consumers fell in love with. But it's also a really important grape because Pinot Noir and Pinot Blanco are all relatives of Pinot Grigio. In fact, Pinot Grigio is the first mutation from Pinot Blanco. The second mutation is from Pinot Grigio to Pinot Noir. They all derive from Pinot Blanco, all right, or Pinot Blanc if you're in France. Okay? So, and it's Pinot Gris if you're in France instead of Pinot Grigio. But it's an incredibly important grape that really helped put Italy on a map from a winemaking sense. The styles range widely in Italy, and I think you can try our Pinot Grigio for sure right now. Give it a smell and a taste. There's some of the Bertani pictures. There's the grapes slowly dehydrating. There's a vertical of Amarone. We've never had a vintage die. And here's the Volante Pinot Grigio. I think about Pinot Grigio in Italy in a bunch of different categories, but there's bulk production done in big, large, vessels that, you can buy 5-liter jugs of, things like that. And then there's finer end Pinot Grigio, high-end wine. This is certainly one of more of the finer Pinot Grigios you'll try. And Pinot Grigio is planted all throughout Italy. From Trento, it has a real mineral-driven component to it. From another region called Friuli, it's really floral and less pronounced on the fruit. From Tuscany, it's kind of flabby and big and viscous, and it's kind of not very aromatic and not very flavorful. Actually, it's kind of blasé. But from the Veneto, we find a nice marriage of the stone fruits, that beautiful nectarine fruit, Bartlett pear, and with wonderful acidity, a nice touch of the floral. And I really think that from the Veneto is where you find some of the best Pinot Grigio grown in Italy. So as we smell this wine, we can start to pick up a little lemon zest, like the pith of the lemon, not so much the flesh of the lemon. A little apricot. I definitely get some apricot, some white peach kind of presence as well. On the palate, we can pick up that beautiful acidity that makes it pair so well with my favorite dish of the night. Does anyone know why it's my favorite dish of the night? This is called Rosa's signature Caesar salad, and I'm Mike Rosa, so this must be my dish. I don't know. So, I'm Italian American, so all I have is bad jokes. It's rampant within my family. It's not my fault. It's passed from father to son. Bad jokes.
That's right.
So, what's that? Oh, someone said something. All right. So this wine, I think you guys can feel, it's definitely not some of that insipid Pinot Grigio you may have had around town. Pinot Grigio has a lot of different quality platforms. The first wine we had was $29.99 at Fujioka's, so that's before tax. This one's $16.99, so a great everyday sipper price point, something that you can pour with confidence, starting a meal, happy hour, just need something to chill you down in the middle of the day. This is going to be a delightful choice. All right, so let's keep going and moving along here. We're going to leave the Veneto. We're going to head to our first island, the South Island of Sicily. We're going to talk about 2 wines right now with your next course of food. So as you move on to the lasagna bolognese, Bologna is a region in Italy where the bolognese or the ragu was developed. Just for those of you that don't know, that's a tomato-based meat sauce, right? That's a ragu or bolognese. Bolognese is a ragu. Anyone who we go to the grocery store and Prego has their tomato sauce, and then they have their ragu, and then they have the bolognese. I don't know why, because bolognese is a ragu. So you guys figure out the marketing genius behind that one. Or you could be eating the chicken parmigiano, which is really developed from the area of Milan. All right, so Milan is over in Piemonte, and that's where they bred veal, chicken with Parmesan cheese and breadcrumbs, and they usually pound it out pretty thin and flat, and a delicious meal there as well. So both of these wines are going to pair beautifully with these pairings. So we'll talk about that as we get into the wine. So here we can see Planeta. Planeta is interesting because the concept of Planeta was really derived from one of the most influential people in all of Sicilian wine, who actually passed away about 2 years ago, Diego Planeta. Diego Planeta really developed Sicilian wine as we know it today. After World War II, Sicily was devastated. A lot of people think of Normandy, France as a major point of invasion for the American soldiers, but what people forget is that in Europe, while there was another front there with you all in Hawaii, there was a front to the south of Europe that came through northern Africa, up through Sicily, and up the toe and through the boot of Italy into Germany. And that was one of the most hard-fought places in World War II. And the Sicilian climate had never, the economy had never recovered since World War II. In fact, Italy has never recovered since World War II. There's only been 2 years since 1945 where the birth rate has been higher than the death rate in Italy. So that's something remarkable, a declining society. But after World War II, a co-op got together because no producer could produce enough. Their vineyards were destroyed. So they formed a co-op of about 10 producers and started producing this wine at this place called Cantina Sette Sole. Diego Planeta took over the operation of Cantina Sette Sole in 1973. And he said, no longer am I going to pay you on how many grapes you bring to me based on tonnage. I'm going to pay you based on quality. So you get paid per ton if you're in quality A, B, or C. And people started automatically increasing the quality of their grapes, knowing that lower yields yielded higher quality fruit and they'd get more money. And he started a revolution in Sicily towards fine wine and fine grape viticulture and production. In 1996, his family, his nephew his daughter, and actually his two nephews and his daughter, started the winery Planeta to showcase these beautiful terroirs of Sicily that were being ignored by the wine world in general. Why were they ignored? Because one of the main red grape of Sicily is called Nero d'Avola. I'm sure many of you are like, Nero de what? Some people have never even heard of Nero d'Avola today. The white wine was called Grillo, and many people don't know Grillo as well. So they had to find a way to resonate. And so they started their first winery right here at Uomo Dispensa. There's actually two wineries there. And they started with a wine called Chardonnay. They worked with international varietals that people knew. And in the year 2002, the 2000 vintage of Planeta Chardonnay appeared in the Wine Spectator's Top 100. And everybody said, what is this Sicilian wine doing in the Wine Spectator's Top 10? But people knew what Chardonnay tasted like. They'd been drinking California Chardonnay, Burgundies, but for many years now. So they had something to benchmark the quality of the Sicilian wine against. And what that triggered was an exploration into Sicily. And people started saying, I want to drink more Sicilian wine. I want to understand what's going on there. This Chardonnay is incredible. And it was incredible. So the Planeta family saw a need to explore all the terroirs of Sicily. They went first down here to Cersuola di Vittoria at a winery called Dorilli, Vittoria, where they produce Nero d'Avola and Frappato blends. It's the only DOCG in all of Sicily. They next went over to a winery called Bonavini in Noto. Noto is known for a unique soil structure, which I'll get into in a moment. Then they went up to Mount Etna, where they do Fiori di Mezzo or Nova Scotia, as they call it. This is on the side of an active volcano. And then they finally went up to the Campo Malazzo at the tip of the isthmus. This was Julius Caesar's favorite wine region of all. So we got our second segue of the night. We're going from the Caesar salad to an island that houses Julius Caesar's favorite wine of the Roman Empire. What makes these places special is the soil. So as we look at Campo Malazzo, we have this incredible sandstone soil. You see this gray kind of fine sand that exists there, from an alluvial erosion. From the Mount Etna property, we have this black volcanic soil. And as you drive across Etna, it's very reminiscent actually of being on the big island of Hawaii, where a lava flow could end a street. There's also porous, and I forget the name. There's the flowing kind of lava, and then there's the spiky kind of lava. Like one's called ahi, and one's called, I forget the Hawaiian names for it. I learned it some years ago when I was there, and I've since forgotten.
The spiky stuff is a'a, and the flowing stuff is pahoehoe.
Pahoehoe. Okay, thank you, Michael. Coming in with the save, Michael McCrae. So those flows exist on this volcano because these are two active volcanoes, right? So, and the soil in some parts, you can just pick up, it's very porous, you can crumble in your hands, and the grapes love this soil and grow right out of this dark black soil here. The Noto is about a 40% composition of limestones. The soil is so white, even on a cloudy day, you need sunglasses. It's like being on the side of a snow-capped mountain skiing. That's how the light refraction hits off of that soil. Though really, now this is another one for you, Michael, who live in Kona. If you know Kona dye shirts in the soil and the decomposing marine shelf and coral reef of Kona, this is a decomposing coral reef of Vittoria, a red coral reef that has decomposed and has left about 5 to 15 feet of this dust that has no nutritional value to grapes at all. And so that's pretty interesting, some of the parallels we're seeing to even the microclimates of the Hawaiian Islands and Planeta. So Planeta wanted to build a winery on each one of these sites. to capture the unique terroir of each one of these sites. If they're trucking it all around the island, they lose some of the unique qualities that's ambient in the air. At Dorili, they use open-top fermenters, spontaneously fermenting yeast, and there's the pollen of rosemary, sage, and thyme all around this area, growing wild along the streets. Nobody needs an herb garden in Vittoria because the herbs are just go to the ditch and pick them right out of the ditch. It's incredible. It's also the center of the tomato production for all of Sicily. You know, so all of these house a unique terroir that they want to capture in the winery. And that's really what Planeta is all about. And they want to house these areas and showcase them as they are. So the wine we're drinking from Planeta, I kind of went through all that. Here's Campo Malazzo. Here's Campo Malazzo, beautiful place. This is the Lago Arancia. Everyone seems to think Sicily is like a funeral procession in Godfather 2, right? It's like this arid desert and people tripping over giant rocks and everyone's sweating. This area where this is actually where the wine we're drinking comes from, these vineyards right here. It rarely gets above 95 degrees. It's mediated by the Mediterranean trade wind I mentioned previously, and also the Sirocco winds from Northern Africa. And it rarely is, you can see this is not a desert-like environment at all in Sicily. So let's talk about this wine. It's called La Segreta. What does La Segreta mean? La Segreta means the secret. Why is it called the secret? Because in the early, you know, let's call it the early 11th century or 12th century, when you were traveling through Sicily, you were in danger of being robbed by bandits. The Planeta family owned a hotel, and a baio is called, where you could bring your farm animals inside the hotel at night. So if you were traveling with sheep, you could bring the sheep inside the hotel's baio and you'd be safe. But if you didn't make it by sundown, you were in a bit of a pickle. So the Planeta family was known to have this secret spot to travelers. It was a freshwater spring up on this hill. You can see the hill right here. The red dot is the hill. And it was that freshwater spring was stocked with bread and cheese each night, so that if you were on the top of the hill, you would have an advantage over bandits running up the hill to take your livestock and rob you. And so that is how that wine came to be. The Planeta family immigrated from Spain 800 years ago to Sicily. The wine is a blend of Nero d'Avola, Merlot, Syrah, and Cabernet Franc. Remember, I told you they worked with a lot of international varietals to help people come into contact with Sicilian wine. But Nero d'Avola is a red grape coming from the town of Avola. And the Merlot Syrah actually has been in Sicily for over 3,000 years. It was, the Sicilians think it actually started at Siracusa, but those of us that might know a little better know that the Phoenicians brought Syrah from the Middle East to Sicily as they started cultivating vines and throughout the Mediterranean. So Syrah was brought by the Phoenicians from the Middle East to Sicily about 3,000 years ago. And Cabernet Franc, another international varietal. The wine is made in a manner that's ready to drink. This wine is supposed to be easy drinking, very food versatile. It has a good acid. It sees no oak aging whatsoever. You can see its color is kind of light, even. And when you get the wine on your palate, you're not feeling any real aggressive tannic structure. What do I mean by tannins? In this red wine, we're going to experience tannins, right? Red wines or white wines don't typically have tannin because they don't macerate on the skins, and tannin is a pigment in the skins. So there's only 4 grapes in the world that bleed red juice, right? And every other red grape bleeds white juice. And in order to become a red wine, they have to macerate on their skins and extract the pigment from the skins. With that extraction period comes tannins. when we take a sip of the red wine, you can go ahead and do that now. You'll feel the drying of the gums, right, around your gums, and that drying is tannin. If you drink tea, you'll feel tea dries out your mouth. Tea leaves actually have a lot of tannin in them, and so that's how you can identify tannin. But this is a very low tannin wine. It's made in a style that is going to be delicious with our chicken, delicious with our lasagna bolognese, and be really pleasant and easy drinking. All right. I love this wine. You can even put a little chill on this wine, and it's wonderfully delicious with a slight chill and on a hot day. You can drink it cooler than the 60 to 58, 62 degrees of cellar temperature. This wine is $16.99 at Fujioka's. All right, so now we're going to go on to Sella Mosca. Sella Mosca, we can see here, and is located on the west side of Sardinia. So we're leaving Sicily, the island here. We're going to catch a ship. We're going to sail around the south side of the island. It's all hot and arid and desert like there, so you don't want to be there anyway. And we want to go all the way around to that northwestern section of the island. This area is incredibly important because of this right here, the blue zones. All right, this area is one of 5 areas in the world highlighted as the blue zones of the world, where the highest concentration of people living over the age of 100 exist. Number 1 is Okinawa, Japan. There's a place in Costa Rica, and number 3 is in Sardinia, Algarve. And one of the reasons they believe that this is the case is because they grow their own produce organically. They eat and farm their own animals and crops. Their economy isn't exactly a industrial economy, so they're not breathing in factory fumes and all that. And they drink Cananao, Sella Mosca Cananao Reserva, the next wine. They drink this wine. This wine, Cananao, is the grape with the highest components of resveratrol of any grape on the planet. I've done some research. It looks like Tannat might actually have the claim to that, but Cananao is very high in resveratrol or antioxidants. So Dr. Oz, everybody knows Dr. Oz, he grabbed this bottle of wine, Sella Mosca Cananao. He held it up on his show and he said, drink this wine and you'll live to be 100. And in fact, the toast of Sardinia is Centiani, 100 years. And that was long before Dr. Oz discovered Cananao. So they knew of the antioxidant qualities of this wine well before that. The area was actually established by traveling people throughout the Mediterranean. And so Sardinia is a real melting pot. It's been controlled by the Etruscans, it's been controlled by the Phoenicians, it's been controlled by the Spanish, and the Spanish stayed there for almost 900 years. And in the town of Alghero, in addition to Italian, you'll see Catalonian spoke today. And there's a radio station and TV stations all in Catalonian on the island today. The winery was established by an engineer and a banker named Sella and Mosca. It was purchased from the Marchese of Villamarina, was a general in the Roman army and received the land some years prior. And then in the late 1800s, while Phylloxera, a little louse, was eating the root hairs of vines and killing the vines of Europe, Sella and Mosca were on a hunting trip in Sardinia and noticed how healthy the vines were. The reason why is because Phylloxera couldn't travel underwater and it doesn't live well in sandy soil, so it couldn't live in Sardinia. So they started the winery as a nursery, the second largest continuous vineyard in Europe for a moment of time. And they started grafting the noble varieties of Europe onto American rootstocks that were resistant to the louse phylloxera that was killing it. By 1933, Europe had almost been completely wiped clean of vines. And it hit in waves starting in 1860 all the way up to 1933. And Ceylon Mosca was an instrumental component to repopulate. If you drink Bordeaux today, that Cabernet exists there because of Ceylon Mosca. If you drink Burgundy today, they grew Burgundy. They had over 2,200 varietals cataloged on their vineyard for propagation, for replanting Europe with vines. So all of these regions were able to replant because of Ceylon Mosca. So it's kind of an interesting piece. But nurseries have short lives in the world of wine because grapes are so easy to populate. So once you have a vine, you graft the rootstock on the next, and you can just keep populating your own vines and have your own nursery on your own vineyard. So it was short-lived to be a nursery, and they started producing wines. And they produced, although they produced a lot of varietals, they went back to their indigenous varietals. Cananao actually was thought to have moved from Spain to Sardinia. And it was originally a grape called Garnacha, or Grenache, for those of you from France, but it mutated in the Sardinian climate. And that's how it received the higher components of resveratrol. Something within the mutation added that resveratrol. All right, as we taste the wine, I have mine here. Hopefully you have your bottle. As I taste the wine, we can look again into this glass. It's got a lighter color. It's not a deep purple or something like a Lodi wine from California would have. It's much more of a pretty red, a little bit garnet around the edge. And that's because this wine ages for 3 years. There's a little bit about Giovanni Pina, the winemaker. And I just want to get to, oh, there's Sardinia. Look at that. Huh? Look at that water. You guys don't see anything like that there in Hawaii, right? So the cellar, and there's the wine. So this wine ages for 3 years, so 2 years in wood, 1 year in bottle to get its Reserva status before it really ships out to us. So that is how we start to see this garnet color. It throws a little bit of the color in that barrel and that time in the barrel. On the nose, I think instead of getting like a ripe cherry, I get almost like if you cut open a cherry and left it out on the counter for an hour and came back to it, and it started to get that kind of rusty kind of quality to it. Something more like that, like a cherry that's almost like fermenting a little bit. Definitely get some interesting kind of more leather type notes as well. And I get like cigar box, and that speaks to the oak regiment as well, if you have a cigar box or cedar box. As I taste the wine, we can certainly feel a little more tannin than the Planeta. We can feel our mouths dry out a little bit. We still have a great acidity to the wine. This is going to be great with the lasagna bolognese. And the wine itself, I mean, for $18.99 is a credible deal for us today. All right. So we'll keep moving along here.
Hey, Mike, if I could, yeah, just real quick on Cananao. It's a very popular wine in Hawaii. And one of the things that was great was when the Blue Zone initially got all the publicity with the book, and where Cananao was mentioned, in the book and in all the press. The Hawaiian Airlines had Cananao on their international first class flights for about 4 years. And I think, that really got good international recognition, through all that, exposure and tasting. And this particular wine in Hawaii, I think is a great wine, you know, in this marketplace over here. And, it really has a strong foundation.
Absolutely. It's been actually Hawaii is an incredibly big market for us in the U.S. for Canada now,
Yeah.
and it's got a lot of following. So
Yeah.
you can pick this up in a lot of locations, Fujioka's being one of them, and enjoy it. It is very food versatile, and I think that's one of the things.
I think it's really cool. Like people that are into wine, obviously when it comes to varietals, everybody knows Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Merlot, and the typical red varietals. But Cannonau is the varietal. It's 100% Cannonau, and if your friends haven't tried it, I'd highly recommend you turn them onto this wine because I think they're really going to like it. And it's great as an aperitif by itself, and certainly with food, it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful pictures here we see of Sardinia. It's an incredible place. The vineyards right by that beautiful ocean. And if you guys are ever at any of these wineries, I'll take a moment as you guys finish eating your main course, start maybe thinking about your dessert. As you guys, I do want to mention it, if you're in Italy at all, I'll give you all my email address at the end of the presentation. It would be a pleasure to set you up to visit any one of our wineries at any time. Make sure you don't see any tasting fees or anything like that, and have a great experience at any of the wineries we go through today. It would be 100% our pleasure. All right. So now we head to a history that's like almost too good to be. It's so good you may not believe it. The history of this family. It's an incredible property. It's an incredible estate. It's this hamlet right here is called Fontarutoli. And the hamlet of Fontarutoli resides in Chianti Classico. Okay. Chianti Classico, obviously being in the center of Italy, in Tuscany, not far from Florence, and just north of Siena, two really incredible cities. And at the time, they were actually city-states, right, that warred quite regularly with one another. In fact, the Massey family made their fortune just like many families do today. If you notice on the crest of the family, or on the crest of the bottle here, you can see an arm holding a mace. They were weapons producers. And so that's how they made a fortune throughout the medieval times, producing weapons for all these wars between Florence and Siena. And they were on the south tip of Florence, so in the first strung of battle there. The family is incredible. The estate goes back to 1435, and the family itself has 26 generations of winemaking history, as Giovanni has had his son now, and now has 26 family member into the Massey family and into the winery. The story, though, goes back even further than that. In Italy, we name wines by the region, right? And that region is, in this case, Chianti Classico. In the Veneto, we call it Valpolicella. In Sicily, it's Sicily, right? So the wines oftentimes were named Chianti Classico, Brunello di Montalcino, Barolo, named after a region, not the grape. That happened because of a gentleman named Sir Lapo Massey, the great-great-great-grandfather. In 1398, he was a banker, and he was purchasing some barrels of red Chianti, he called it on the trade receipt, because the wine had come from Chianti. He referred to it by its regional name. And at that point, they're all throughout Italy, they started naming wine by the region rather than the grape variety. So we can blame that confusion on Sir Lapo Matse, that trade receipt back in 1398. And it's the first record of that ever happening. The next kind of story that is really unbelievable about this family, and here you can see the family tree over here, is somewhere around this area here, there was an ancestor named Filippo Matse. And Filippo Matse was an incredible man. Filippo traveled the world, and he was kind of the black sheep of the family. They didn't necessarily, he was a very progressive thinker. He wasn't always in line with the Catholic churches and its ways. And so they sent him on little missions frequently. One of the missions he went on was to go to London to a fair in which a gentleman from America was unveiling his new designed stove. And that gentleman's name was Benjamin Franklin. There, he met Thomas Jefferson, who was traveling with Benjamin Franklin at the time. And Filippo Matse and Thomas Jefferson struck up such a friendship. They started a pen pal, writing back and forth. And in one of the letters that the Matse family has and is in a museum now, Filippo Matse writes to Thomas Jefferson about a concept sweeping across Europe, how all men are created equal and the equality of human rights. Thomas Jefferson, of course, plagiarized that in the Declaration of Independence, and that end became history, right? The first vines planted in Europe for viticultural purposes were at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello estate, and it was planted by Filippo Matse. Filippo Matse convinced his family to help fund the American Revolutionary War with both money and arms. And for this reason, in John F. Kennedy's book, A Nation of Immigrants, he writes, an unsung great American founding father was Filippo Matse, an Italian patriot, but an American patriot as well. And the first federally issued stamp of a non-American face was this stamp right here, Filippo Matse. So the first international face of any stamp issued by the American government was a Filippo Matse. Pretty crazy story. To make the story even more interesting, I was looking for a little label, but maybe I don't have it. Sometimes you'll see on Chianti Classico a little black rooster on the bottle, and that is called the Consorzio di Gallo Nero, right? The Consorzio di Gallo Nero is a consortium that grades Chianti Classico and determines that it represents Chianti Classico. They enforce the laws of yields and aging requirements. They taste the wine, they make sure it's up to par, not flawed. They regulate that. And why is the black rooster the emblem? This is the story. At the time, the Florentine Empire and the Siena Empire, were warring. And after so much loss of life to battles, they decided to settle their boundary line once and for all with a peaceful method. At the first crow of the rooster, a rider was to set out from each city, and where they met would be the new boundary line between Florence and Siena. So Siena got this beautiful white rooster, all white. They fed him well, they pampered him, they treated the rooster like a king, making somewhat of a ceremony of the whole thing, and the rooster was so content. The people in Florence, the Florentines, they grabbed a deformed black rooster, they shoved them in a cellar, they closed all the windows, they starved the rooster to death, and that was their treatment of the rooster. So on the day the riders were supposed to set out, they brought the roosters up, and an operative of each city-state was at that city to confirm the crow of the rooster. Right at the very brink of the midnight going from darkness to gray, the black rooster of Florence crowed, while the white rooster in Siena didn't crow until sun actually came up. So while one left at about 3 a.m., the other writer left at about 5:30 a.m. The story goes a couple of different ways. One says the writer of Florence rode all the way to the door of Siena. But the story most commonly told is that the writers met at the town of Fontarutoli, where this winery is located and where this winery is. This is the winery today that we see. They built this winery in 2007. It was a 26 million euro project to build this particular winery. And it's a complete gravity flow, state-of-the-art winery meant to blend in with the surroundings. As you can see, the vines almost creep up on the winery itself, as there's a lot of biodynamic and organic viticulture being practiced in these vineyards today. Here's some of the vineyards you see. These rocks are called galestro, and they're limestone broken up rocks in sandstone and clay soil of Chianti Classico. This is the barrel room, the bottom level. They actually tapped into a freshwater spring while bearing in to make the barrel room. So they don't have to temperature or humidity control this room at all. They have water running down the back of this rock wall in the background that's completely exposed. And this is where all their barrels are stored. A little bit on the vineyards and some olive groves you can see up here in the distance. As I mentioned, this is really organic viticulture at its finest. Of course, a couple horses, if you visit, you can ride. And this is the wine of the night, the Poggio-Badiola. And Poggio-Badiola is a Sangiovese Merlot, a little splash of Petit Verdot in there as well. In order to be called a Chianti Classico, you have to be 80% Chianti Sangiovese. If you're not, then you cannot be a Chianti Classico, all right? So this is 30% Merlot. Why? This is called Badiola because it comes from one of the 5 vineyards owned by the Fontarutoli family. This vineyard is at about 580 meters, so it's pretty high elevation. And 580 meters, so what's that in feet? That's probably like 15, I mean, it's close to 1,500 feet and change, right? So this is a high vineyard, and Sangiovese doesn't always fully ripen at the top of this vineyard. The reason why is because Sangiovese has a long growing season. Merlot is known for having a very short growing season. So it ripens very quickly. So they planted a lot of Merlot on this vineyard site called Poggio-Badiola. This vineyard is important for 2 reasons. One, it was the vineyard that was given in the dowry, the marriage of a Mazzei to a Fontarutoli in 1435. So this vineyard was acquired as part of marrying into the family. And the second thing is this beautiful church built in 996 that exists still on the property today. You can go inside of it. It was built in 996. And that's an incredible structure to behold. Okay. The style of this wine is a very textural wine. Mazzei's style and the style of Fontarutoli is one driven towards modernity, but with a respect to tradition. What does that mean? So they use small batch, open top fermentation vessels, but they use French barrique. They use organic farming methods and avoid the use of pesticides or modern farm making techniques in the vineyard. But they take a style that really coaxes the fruit out of the wine with some stainless steel fermentation vessels, right? So it's a good blend between traditional and modernity. And the style shows a wine that's got some structure, some weight, some tannins. The Merlot will give it a little bit of that textural component as well. But the wine should be delicious, whether you're having it with the chocolate cake. Hold on. Needed to wet my whistle there. I've been talking for almost 2 hours here. Whether you're drinking having the chocolate cake, red wine can pair nicely with that if it has some tannic structure to it. Or with the cheesecake, this wine has a little bit of acidity to wipe away that the way the cheesecake kind of coats the palate, right? So that's how the wine can really work with the food. So, and this wine is $17.99 at Fujioka. So, an incredible lineup tonight. What I think, really resonates to me is you heard some of the stories, how these wines play and these wineries played culturally within the Italian world, whether it's the sparkling wine that we started with, which was the first Chardonnay being brought in, setting up a community of growing Chardonnay in Trento, Italy, whether it be revolutionizing to produce dry wines in an area that produced sweet wines, as the Bertani family did, whether it be pioneering and forging a path and sharing knowledge with their co-neighbors, as Planeta did, whether it's repopulating Europe with vines in the way that Sella and Mosca did from their home base in Sardinia, or being a winery that's so ingrained into the history that people don't even think Chianti Classico in Italy without thinking about the name Fontarutoli. I hope you guys could sense and feel that we try to bring wines that embolden a community, that created a style that I look forward to, and to help contribute to the overlining culture, which is really the aim of what the Hawaii Homeowners is doing as well. We're creating community continuity, flavors of the neighbors, getting people together, enjoying company. And the one thing I think we've all kind of missed through COVID more than anything else is seeing each other and being in good spirits with one another. So with that, I salute to you all. I thank you for the time, attention. I hope you found this informative and entertaining. And I hope you enjoyed the food and wine pairings together. All my best to you. Many mahalos. Salute.
And Mike, we do have a question in the chat box from Raina concerning food pairings.
That's what our menu was today. Are there other foods you'd recommend paired with wines you talked about today? Oh, absolutely. The easiest thing is with Ferrari. My favorite thing is a wine that's made in the champagne method and French fries. I love it. It's a great pairing. It doesn't have to be fancy. I think that's one thing we all think, like wine and food and snobbery together. My God, let's get off the high horse. I'm talking Ferrari and French fries. We have Ferrari every Friday at my house. Mark's heard me say this many times. And we can have it with so many wide range of foods because it is so versatile. But French fries is one of my favorite pairings. With the Sella Mosca Canna now, one of my favorite pairings is cedar plank salmon. I feel like the cedar plank smokiness really makes the fruit profile of that wine explode. The tannin structure isn't so much that it beats down the salmon the way a Cabernet would or a Nebbiolo would or something like that. I love it with that. With the Planeta, honestly, rotisserie chicken is a great pairing. Red wine and rotisserie chicken, and getting that fat that kind of will come from that rotisserie chicken turning all day and that moisture. It's a wonderful pairing as well. With Poggio Badiola, we can go into the steak range, but honestly, Sangiovese-based wines belong with wild boar to me. I can't beat that pairing ever. I was once in a church in Tuscany. I was traveling through, and we came out of the church. A guy had, this was the first food truck I ever saw in Italy. He brought up a van, he opened up the side of the truck, and it was a whole roasted pig and you could get what was called pigri pigri or grasso grasso. So pigri pigri is lean and grasso is fat. So you could choose what you want. You had a fresh baked ciabatta bread, and the only thing the sandwich had was the bread and the meat, and that's what you were handed and you paid for. And it was absolutely stunning with Chianti Classico and Sangiovese. I love it to death. You guys have some great ways with pigs in Hawaii, so I trust you'll find some Sangiovese and Chianti Classico to pair with your preparations of pig and hog and boar and things like that. So I said there's a couple other questions that popped up. Which wineries recover from variables of nature? Do they modify their techniques, recipes? So, okay, well, this is a super cool and interesting questions right now. So we have a lot of things happening within the wine world right now with the awareness of global warming, right? And whether that's your belief or not, we're registering higher temperatures over the last 15 years in a lot of vineyards. What's happening and we're on the Poggio Badiola slide right now, they can now ripen Sangiovese at 580 meters. But in other areas, what they're doing is they're working with different clones. So as they replant the vineyards, they did, like here in Chianti Classico in the year 2000, they had a conference with all the producers got together. They shared clonal research and what grapes were ripening at higher temperatures and how they were preserving acidity. And they started sharing clonal information. And as people have replanted vineyards over the last 21 years, they've been planting varieties that are more suited to climatic change. That, of course, goes in different ways. And if there's rain at bud break and flowering, it can be devastating. 2014 was a devastating year for many producers in Italy because there was a big storm and rains that came that year with flowering, and that reduced the flowers create the fruit. So that's a problem. Frost is another problem that can set in early and destroy fruit. Also hail. Hail is one of the biggest problems that face and that destroys fruit. You cannot combat those challenges. Last year, 2020, France was hit with hail and frost before harvest happened. And as a result, your French rosés will be roughly 35 to 40% of the production that they were the previous year. So that's devastating. So there's some natures you can plan and protect against, and there's some natures that you can do nothing about, unfortunately. And that is a very difficult challenge. So in some wine regions, you can do amendments to wine. The major amendments are called chaptalization and acidification. Right? So in some areas, you can add sugar. You can add just cane sugar right to your wine, so that if your wine didn't ripen all the way, you can add sugar and ferment to 12.5% alcohol through that. The French AOC avoids chaptalization. The DOC avoids chaptalization. There is some AOCs that actually do allow chaptalization, or that they control, government controlling agency for French wine. And there is some areas of Germany that allow it. Acidification is allowed as well in some areas, but not in others. You can actually acidify here in the U.S. You can chaptalize in the U.S. We're kind of the wild, wild west. People can do whatever they want here. The other measure that's important to recognize is irrigation. You cannot irrigate your vines in Europe. Okay, it's against every DOC. It's illegal in Europe for Italy and in AOC. You can apply in a drought year for the ability to irrigate your vines if your vines are stressed to the point of death. And so this is very liberal. Keep in mind, these are government agencies. So there is years like 2003 where everyone was irrigating their vines all throughout Europe because the heat wave was so strong. There was a fear of losing vines. So when you go to vineyards in Europe, you will see irrigation. It is most likely not in use, right? I'm a regular Merlot drinker, but Cannonau is different and really good. I guess I'll have to expand my horizons on these wines. Thank you for, thank you. Thank you for expanding your horizons. I love Merlot too. I drink a lot of Merlot. I didn't buy into sideways that dog Merlot in favor of Pinot Noir. There's just as much shady Pinot out there as there is shady Merlot out there, and there's a lot of good Pinot and a lot of good Merlot out there. I'm glad you like the Cannonau. See, Thomas Jefferson, sorry, okay. So thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed. All right, and
Hey, Mike, I got one other question. You mentioned that there's 4 grapes in the world that bleed red juice. Do you know what
yeah,
those grapes are? Or?
I can remember 2 of them off the top of my head.
And,
the French one, Alicante Boucher, Alicante Boucher, and Colorino. And the other 2 are so obscure that I always end up forgetting them. But you could Google them for sure.
And they're from, okay, so those are French grapes, the first 2?
Alicante Boucher is a really interesting grape. Actually, it's planted all throughout the Mediterranean, but it kind of gets its name from France. And it's a lot in the Languedoc. It does make its way into Italy, actually, believe it or not, and even in Greece and over to the Middle East, towards Israel and on down.
Wow.
Colorino actually exists in Tuscany. In fact, there's stories of kids pushing the grapes on their shirt and running to their mothers and saying, "Ah, Mom," and pretending to have met their bloody end.
Well, hey, we want to thank you for bringing this to everyone tonight. It was fantastic. You're an awesome presenter, and we really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and taking us on this tour of Italy. And I hope everybody enjoyed the experience, and hopefully you can enjoy these great wines at other times in the future and share them with your friends. So, Raina, thank you very much. Michael McCrae, John, thank you very much, guys, for working the technical part of this as well. And if anyone has any other questions, fire away. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this. And we really appreciate everybody attending tonight's educational.
We did have one last question, Mark, from Linda. That is there a particular Cannonau you'd suggest for a non-wine drinker to try first?
Yeah, I mean, this one is going to be pretty stylistically how you'll find most Cannonau's. There's another producer called Argialis that is a little bit more of a ripe style. It's not going to be as complex. But the way I'd probably try the Cella Mosca with them, because it does have a great fruit profile and it does kind of give you that age presence. This is, with the aging period of it. If you give it a little chill, make sure it's cellar temperature, and they'll probably likely end up enjoying it. If it's a little bit much for them, they just might not be a Cannonau lover, and you might look at some Garnacha from Spain.
Thanks again, Mike. If we can give a virtual hand for Mike Rosa. Thank you so much. Thank to all of our HHOC supporters that are here today. Thanks also to Mark, Fujioka's Macaroni Grill, and all of you. Hopefully we can connect soon in person sometime soon. But until then, good to see you guys virtually. Thanks again.
It was awesome.
you
Thank
all.
you so much.
Thank
Go
you.
Dodgers.
Yeah.
Go Dodgers.